You are the words and the music. You are the song that I sing. You are the melody. You are the harmony. Praise to your name I will bring. You are the Lord of lords. You are the mighty God. You are the King of all kings. So now I give back to you the song that you gave to me. You are the song
is better at being different. And evidently, we had a couple that didn't get that message this morning because I don't know if you noticed. I did because I'm thinking of being different, things that are not the same. But we had Ralph over here and Nathan over here, and I think they're wearing the exact same shirt and tie. I got you. I mean, it's almost the exact same outfit except for the pants. So at least maybe y'all did a little different. Well, I'm thankful. Now everybody's going to be looking at their clothes. From the very beginning, God has a plan for us, and that plan is for us to be different. When we look at from the very beginning of creation, He made Adam and Eve, and they were the only two people on the planet, and then from there, things began to change. They had children, their children had children, and their children had children, and the world began to be different. But as we read those generations in Genesis chapter 5, we see that there is a distinct difference in some people because it says that they walked with God. Enoch was one of those that walked with God, which drew a line between his lifestyle and the lifestyle of everybody else's of the day. Then we get into the days of Noah, and we see where the thoughts and intents of man were evil continually, but Noah and his family, that they were different. They were a lot different than everybody else. God has always encouraged us to be different, not to be like the world. Don't be conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Solomon encourages his young son when you read Proverbs chapter 1, verse 15, where it says, my son, when you look at all of the ways that these people walk in, my son, make sure you don't walk in those same ways, that you keep yourself far from them. Encouraging us to be not like everybody else. So, Christians, we should understand this principle pretty easily. We should understand that we should be better at being different than the rest of the world. That we shouldn't try to be just like everybody else and blend in with everybody. That we should stand out, but not in the way that some might think. Stand out in such a way that we are different from the rest of the world. That's our theme for the month, and we're going to be looking at various people about how they were different. And the first one that we're going to look at is how Daniel was different. Daniel was different by being uncompromising. He was different in knowing who he was, and he wasn't going to allow whatever situation he was in to compromise that. So let's talk about what's happening here. Nebuchadnezzar has come over from the Babylonians as king, and he has taken over the children of Israel and the children of Judah. He has carried them away into captivity, and as he carries them away, it's because of their punishment, because of their idolatry, but as he carries them away into captivity, he grabs specifics. He looks for some specific people. If you look there in Daniel chapter 1, we can see officials to bring in some of these sons of Israel, verse 3, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence of every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning of knowledge, and who had the ability for serving the king's court, and he ordered him to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. So as they've been carried off, the king selects these certain people, and we're going to get into these. Daniel's one of these people that we get into, that we find out about. But they're taught to go and look for these specific people and bring them in, and what the king is trying to do is trying to merge them into their way of life, trying to create in them something different to where they all are going to be like the Babylonians, which would make the transition easier for the rest of the captives. To, push the borders of his kingdom. He was a pretty smart fella. Even though he was a pagan, He was still pretty smart and did a lot of things that a good leader would do, and this was one of those things that he did. But as we look at what happens here, as we look at some of the things that are going on, there's a prayer that I want you to look at in Psalm 137. So mark this, and I think I put this on the screen here. Psalm 137 explains this prayer. This might be something that they had prayed while they were in this captivity. All right? Listen to what it says. By the rivers of Babylon we sat down and we wept. When we remembered Zion, that would be Jerusalem. Upon the willows of the midst of it we hung our harps. For there our captors demanded of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? You know, we're encouraged to be different. We're encouraged not to be like everybody else, but sometimes we feel like this psalm. How can we sing it in a land that's so foreign? How can we live this life of a Christian in a world that is so different than what God appointed for us to live in? How can we be, is God calling us to be so unusual that we stand out in a way? You know, there are those of the religious faith, of various religious faith, who choose to be so different that they stand out in a poor way. They dress totally opposite of everybody else, which does cause them to stand out, but it causes them to draw attention to the wrong things. There are those that do some weird things with their faith, which causes them to be totally different, but it draws attention there to the wrong things. If we are God's people, we should be able to sing this song. We should be able to sing one of the songs of Zion, the Lord's song, but we feel as though, how can we sing it when we're captors in this foreign land, when we're living in the 21st century, when we're living in a world that is so anti-God, anti-faith, anti-Christianity, and then we look at Daniel and we see that he's living in the same kind of world. He's living in the same sort of environment that we've been called to live in. And yet with Daniel, his faith, we see that he was uncompromising and not going to give in to what happens. Let's read the rest of the story about what happens. The king sorted these people out, these youths who were good looking, showing intelligence in all these branches of wisdom, to teach them his ways. Verse 5, that the king appointed for them a daily ration of the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank. And he appointed that they should be educated for 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter into the king's service. Now among them were the sons of Judah, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now as we look at these young men that we're going to see, the Babylonians used these strategies. They wanted to isolate them. They wanted to pull them out of their regular environment. They didn't want these guys to live in the same environment as the rest of the other Jews that they had taken captive. They didn't want an uproar. These were the guys that would have started the uproar. These would be the guys that would try to start a rebellion and maybe fight against them while they were in that bondage. But the king wanted to isolate them, to pull them away from any encouragement, from any sort of positive reinforcement to stay who they were. That's what the devil does to us. That's what the world does. Tries to pull us away from our Christian principle. Tries to pull us away from our Christian activities, from our church services, from our time that we spend together in devotionals and our classes, to try to pull us away from that, to remove any sort of encouragement that we might have to continue fighting on, so that we might just give in. But not only did they use this isolation technique, they used this indoctrination. He tried to teach them his ways. It's a form of brainwashing, really, and he started at the very root of it all. He didn't just want to change their thoughts and change their patterns and change their education. He wanted to change who they very were. He wanted to change their names. Look at this. When you look at these names, they had these names that they were given from Judah. My name is Daniel. That was his name. Name means God is judge. His family named him that for a reason. They had looked at that name, they had thought about that, and names had meanings. And those meanings were very important to the parents as they named him. Well, Nebuchadnezzar didn't like this name, God is judge, from their language. He wanted to change it to something of his language. So he changed it to Belteshazzar. Well, I'll tell you that in just a minute. Hananiah means God is gracious. Azariah means God is my help. Mishael, who is like God? You see how they're deeply rooted in God, deeply rooted in Jehovah. These names meant something to these people, and when they thought about that, when they thought their name, when you said their very name, that's what it meant. This is what they were changed to. Belteshazzar, Bel Will Protect You, which was one of their pagan gods. Change it away from God to change it as though an idol will protect you. Then we got this one here, Shadrach, inspired by Aku, the moon god. Abednego, servant of Nebo, another god of the moon. Who is like Abu? That was Meshach. So you see, it wasn't that they just wanted to change their thoughts, wanted to change the perception of who they were at the very root. And that's what the devil tries to do to us. That's what the world tries to corrupt us with. But these men, these young men, remained true to who they really were. They never forgot their true calling. They never forgot their true God. So what did they do? And specifically Daniel this morning, what did he do to live that life that was uncompromising? Well, the first point is up here on the screen. The first thing that Daniel did was he did his homework. That sounds ridiculous, but it's true. Daniel was a man that did his homework. The king had appointed for them to eat this choice food and to live in this certain way, and they changed their names. But you look in verse 8 of the chapter. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine with which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. When the king came in and took Daniel, he gave him all these opportunities to be a leader in his nation, to change who he was. But Daniel said no. He purposed in his heart, some of your Bibles may read, he had made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food. Now, we could get into all kinds of differences. The reason why he defiled himself was maybe he didn't want to eat the food. That would have considered him unclean. Maybe he didn't want to drink the wine because that would have violated his principles for God. Or maybe he just didn't want to eat with the king because that would be endorsing the king. If you ate with someone, shared a meal with them at their table, it would mean that you endorsed exactly what they were doing. It doesn't matter what the reason was. It really means nothing as opposed to why he decided not to do what the king wanted him to do. The point that we need to see was that he had already made up his mind before he got there that he was not going to defile himself, that he was not going to compromise who he really was and what God had in store for him and what God wanted from him, that he was going to remain true to that. Well, how do you do that? Well, let's look at this word here. When you look at this word made up your mind, the word made, or in other versions, you're going to read purpose in your heart. That word is very specific. I want you to understand what it means. It means to bring and commit. You have brought your mind, you have committed your mind, changed your mind, but it also means, with another spin, to rehearse or to tread down. Well, let's talk about the tread down thing. Let's say you're going out. When I was a kid, I used to walk to the pond at my granddad's place. We used to go out there as kids and we would go fishing. Well, as you went, the grass would grow up and it would get really tall, but you saw a distinct way to get down to the pond from the barn because that was the way we always went. We would tread down the grass when it first started, and the more we went down there, you would see there would be no grass where the path was. The path was dirt. The grass was all around it. The grass would be up to your waist all the way around it, but it was clear down the path because that is the way in which we would tread it down. Or the cows, when they would come in to eat, they would tread it down so it would be used. That means Daniel's been down this road before. It wasn't that he just said, you know what? I'm not going to do it. Guys, I'm not going to do it. I made a decision. This is it. I'm not going to eat this food. I'm going to have a sit-in the king's palace, and I'm not going to do it. That's not it at all. It means, Daniel says, I have been here before. I have tread this road down. I have rehearsed this in my mind over and over and over again. I knew that there was going to come a time in my life where I was going to be asked to compromise. And I knew this is how I don't do it. This was not a hard decision for Daniel. You know why? Because he had made this decision over and over and over in his mind. He had played the scenario somewhat similar to it over and over in his mind hundreds and hundreds of times. So that when it came time to do it, he knew not to give in. You know, when I worked with kids, teenagers, I would talk to them, and I would have the guy and the girl that were dating, they'd come in my office, and they would be, repenting of the sins that they were doing, and they'd be talking about, we got in the back seat of the car, and one thing led to another, and we knew we shouldn't have done what we did, but it was very heated, it was very hard, and the temptation was so strong. And we tried not to give in, but we just couldn't. Well, is that the right time to try not to give in? Is the time to try not to give in to the devil and temptation when the temptation is at its highest point? No, that's not the time. The time to prepare for that comes much earlier. In your bed as you're praying at night. In your Bible class as you're studying. In your daily reading. As you play out scenarios in your mind, I know the devil's going to come at me with both guns blazing. How am I going to do this? Well, let's see. I can first pray. I can first step aside. I cannot try to get myself in the situation to begin with. And he's played out these roles in his mind. When Daniel had made up his mind, he had rehearsed this over and over and over again. If you want to stay uncompromising, if you don't want to give in to what the devil has, or you want to be different in a world that is so much like everything else, you've got to make sure you're prepared for it when it happens. That you cannot just expect it without doing the groundwork. You think about a quarterback. Yesterday there was nothing on television except no sports things going on, except they played old football games all throughout the day on one of the ESPN channels. And we watched a little bit of those high school football games and some other football games. You think of that, and they were talking about these quarterbacks and talking about how these quarterbacks were trained in these rules and these guidelines and these playbooks of how they're supposed to do. Imagine what it would be like if one of these quarterbacks just went out there and the coach called in a play. And called the play in and said, do this, this is the play's name. I don't know those play names, and I'm not going to make a fool of myself any more than I normally do by trying to do that. But calls in all these plays for him to do, and the quarterback gets in there and really has no clue what he's about to do. And just mimics the words, and then hikes the ball, and all of a sudden, the running back is going this way, the wide receiver is going this way, his blockers are going in a certain way, but the quarterback has no idea what he's doing. Because he didn't prepare for the situation. Now, he could be a good athlete, but still not know what's going on. You can be a good Christian. You can have good morals. You can be a great person. But if you're not prepared when that compromise comes, you'll give in. Listen to what the Bible says here in 1 Corinthians. If you look at 1 Corinthians for just a second. Mark this in Daniel. We'll come back to it. In 1 Corinthians, chapter 10. Look at verse 11. These things happen to us as an example. What things? If you look at the very beginning of that chapter, your Bible may have the headline as avoiding the mistakes that Israel made. Avoiding Israel's mistakes. Israel made a lot of mistakes. And when we look at that through the Old Testament, it says, now these things happened to us as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed, lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you, but such is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide you a way of escape also, that you may able to endure it. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. He says, look at the example that these people have made before you. Look at the things that have happened before time and learn from them. Learn. And that's exactly what we're doing with Daniel. Learn, because Daniel had learned over and over and over again from those books of the law that he had been read to all throughout his childhood. As he read them on his own when he got old enough, he knew, he had rehearsed, he had played out, he had tread the paths down. He had been down this road before. A couple more verses on this doing your homework aspect. When you look at this verse here. Prepare your work outside. Make it ready for yourself in the field. Afterwards, then build your house. In one of the songs that we sang earlier about how the disciples were asked to watch and pray, Jesus tells them, while they're in the garden, as he goes off to the garden to pray, he tells those men, you watch here and pray so that when the time comes, you will be able to handle what's about to happen. You see that homework? We got to do our homework. Proverbs 6:11, look at the ant. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer, gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you slumber, O sluggard, when will you arise from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep? So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. You cannot afford to be caught sleeping. You got to be prepared. You got to do your homework. I used to hear this a lot growing up. You bale hay while the sun's shining. You take advantage of it while you can. Doing your homework. Second thing that Daniel does here is he understood the greater good. Daniel knew, if you go back to Daniel and you look at his situation, Daniel knew that his situation didn't just affect him. He knew that when he decided, I'm not going to defile myself with the king's choice food, he is putting at risk not only his own life, the life of his three friends, and the life, even as we read in the story of Phinehas, who says, if I let you do this, Daniel, if I let you eat only what you say to eat, only these vegetables and fruits, which were really just the grains, and drink water instead of eating of the king's choice, if I let you do that and you fail, it's going to be my head that's taken off. He's risking not only his friends, but also the guy that's in charge of him. But Daniel knew that even if that, he knew to trust God, that God would make a difference. He could have just sucked it up and gone through the motions that the king wanted him to do, practice his faith on his own in private. But no. Daniel knew that if he made a difference here at the beginning, it would impact millions of people. His decision impacts me today. His decision impacts you. Not to mention, look at the kings, Nebuchadnezzar. His decision here impacts Nebuchadnezzar. His decision impacts Cyrus. His decision impacts all of those other kings that he was in the service of. Daniel knew that if he didn't compromise, that there was a greater good waiting. Look at this verse in Titus chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. In Titus chapter 2. Exhort the young men to be sober-minded in all things, showing yourselves to be a pattern of good works. In doctrine, showing integrity, reverence, incorruptibility, sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that when one who is an opponent may be ashamed, having nothing evil to say of you. Here's the point of what he's saying. You make yourself a pattern. You understand that those that are going to come after you, that people are looking at you, and the people that are coming after you are going to look at your life as a pattern, and they're going to model their lives after you. So you better make sure you do this right, because there's more at stake than just your soul. Parents, you understand this. There's more at stake than just your own soul. Your souls of your children are at stake as the way you live your life. And whether you choose to come to church or whether you choose to practice these home devos, whether you choose to live that Christian life, whether you choose to give of your means, whatever you choose, whether or not to sing or not as we worship, they are watching you, they are patterning their lives after you, and you are setting a standard. Daniel knew that if he set that right standard, that it affected more than just him, that there was a much greater good entail. Paul talks about this with the Gentiles. When he tells us, as the common thread here is, you live your life different so that when the Gentiles look at you, they know you're different. And they'll want to be like you. Daniel made some sacrifices. If you're going to do that, if you're going to live this way, it requires that you sacrifice. When you look here, the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king who appointed me to give you your food and your drink. For why should I see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. But Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. There it is. Nuts and oats and grains. That was the vegetables that he's talking about. And water. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence, and the appearance of the youths who are eating of the king's choice food, and deal with your servants accordingly as to what you say. So he listened to them, to this matter, and he tested them for 10 days. I'm not as good of a dieter as I need to be. But I tell you that if you told me I just had to eat nuts and grains and drink water for 10 days, that's going to be a huge sacrifice for me. That's going to be hard. But it was much more than that to Daniel. The sacrifice was much greater. What if God had decided to not save him? What if God's plan was for Daniel to die a martyr? You see, Daniel didn't cause a huge uproar in changing the world and how he was going to be different. He was soft-spoken with it. And he made a difference. When we look at these verses about how our lives, if we want to be uncompromising, it's going to take risk in it. When we look at 9:23 of Luke, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily. Follow me. Whoever desires to save his life is going to lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and then loses his own soul? That's the old King James. First sermon ever preached was on this passage. What profits a man if he gains the whole world, but he loses his soul? Daniel understood a risk. Look later on in this chapter, 57 through 62. Lord, I will follow you wherever you go, they said. Jesus said to him, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Then he said to another, follow me. But he said, let me first go and bury my father. Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead. But you go and preach the kingdom of God. To another also said, Lord, I will follow you, but let me first go and bid them farewell who are at my house. But Jesus said to him, no. No one having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. He says, you don't make excuses. You can't be here today and say, you know what, I want to make my life right, but let me go get all these things in order first, Matt. I want to change but let me go fix these things first. Let me change this before I really decide to convert or to give my life to the Lord or to become a Christian or to live this life. I've got to get these ducks in a row. And God says, no. It requires sacrifice. And it was on Daniel's part as well. And then as you look at the end, finally he had to step out in faith. He just had to do it. He just had to trust that God would take care of them, not knowing the real outcome. That key word in verse 13. Let our appearance be observed in your presence and the appearance of the youths who are eating of the king's choice food, to deal with your servants according to what you see. Puts this in the hands of the overseer. Now he's putting it in the hands of God, yes. But he says, whatever happens, we trust what you see, that you will make a decision based on what you see. Man, that's getting out of the boat, isn't it, and walking on the water? That's putting your fate in the hands of someone you don't know. When we look, what Daniel was doing here made a huge difference. Look at chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. When Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in their story of the being thrown into the fiery furnace, look at what they say. Look at the stepping out in faith that they did. Chapter 3, 16 through 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego then said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship your golden image that you have set. These three youths took the pattern that Daniel had set, and they stepped out in faith and said, we put it in God's hands that we're going to do what we're supposed to do, and we're going to trust that God will take care of us. And even if he doesn't, even if we perish, we're going to be better off. 2 Corinthians 5:7, we walk by faith, not by sight. Too many of us are trying to walk by sight. Too many of us are trying to look at things and make sense of it by this world standards and say, on paper it doesn't work, in my bank account it doesn't work, in this it doesn't work. It's not going to work in those ways. You step out in faith. And if you step out in faith, whether the Lord decides to encourage you in that and endorse you in that and take care of you and show you to be a great example to others and lead you into a great physical life, then wonderful. But if he decides to take you and that decision not work out and you end up living destitute for the rest of your life because you made a decision, you'll still be better off. Being different by being uncompromising. We should be good at that. I mean, that should be right up our alley. That's what God has been teaching us from the very beginning. From the very beginning of creation, he taught us, my people are going to walk by a different set of rules. Not the world standards. They're going to walk after my footsteps and do what I have done. And I'm going to show them a pattern by giving them the life of my son, Jesus, and let them follow in his footsteps. And as we follow in that footsteps, are we able to say, look at my life, follow my example as I'm following in these footsteps? Have we walked down that path before? Have we tread down that ground? Have we prepared ourselves and rehearsed those things over and over in our minds so we won't fall prey to them? Have we done our homework? Have we stepped out in faith? Have we made those sacrifices? Have we done those things? Well, that's an answer you have to make for your own. So this morning, as we sing this invitation song, you look at your life and you see if they have. See if you've been uncompromised. But if you've given in, if you've compromised, then here's your chance to change. Here's your chance to get out of that rut and be different. Commit to the way that he has set forth. If there's anything you need to fix in your life, the Lord is here. Jesus is here to take away your sins. You got to come here as we stand and sing this song.
All things are ready. Come you are the light and the music. You are the song that I sing. You are the melody. You are the harmony. Praise to your name I will bring. You are the Lord of lords. You are the mighty God. You are the King of all kings. So now I give back to you the song that you gave to me. You are the song that I sing.